today. We have such fond memories of this place. I almost feel like I'm walking on holy ground when I come here. We came here at a very specific time in our life, and that was when we were feeling the call of God to go on the mission field. And you just came behind us and supported us, and we were able to leave just feeling so loved and so prepared and so prayed for. My only prayer is that all missionaries have a church like that that's behind them, that is supporting them, because these were very, very difficult days for us to go with our small children to Mozambique, but you were there. You loved our kids, and we just thank you so very much. While I was here, I was often asked to sing Sheltered in the Arms of God at various homecoming services or funerals, and the words are just so meaningful to me, not just in that specific type of service, but also for today as we worship, that we are sheltered in the arms of God. The Bible says in Psalms is that underneath us are the everlasting arms. And we can just go through COVID, we can go through difficulties, just knowing that we are sheltered in the arms of God.
Well, good morning to you, and welcome. It's good to be with you again. I think last year yours was canceled, is that right? We were scheduled to come last year and be a part of this with you, but you know, the COVID thing sort of changed everything for us, but we're glad to be with you today and glad that you are here and all is going well. And as Amy said, I do remember very well you all helping us, and Mr. Durwood let us use his storage facility to put all of our stuff in that was coming from all over the planet, it seemed like, because it was all 220s. We couldn't use 110, so we had to order all 220 appliances, and we had to have a place to store it. And so he allowed us to store stuff there. So we do have fond memories of being here and all that took place while we were here, and your support at that time. But today I want us just to take just a short journey through the life of Esther. And I've entitled this message this morning, "A Resume for a Queen." A resume for a queen, Hadassah's provincial journey. Most of us know her by Esther, but her Hebrew name is Hadassah. Just the other day we were in a restaurant in Knoxville. We were visiting with our son and daughter, and there was a young lady behind the counter with the name Hadassah. And so you don't hear or know that name too much, but I guess that's one of the first times I had ever heard that. I want to ask you a question. See how much Bible trivia you do or not know. I wouldn't know this answer, but maybe some of you would have or do. What is something unique about Esther in the Song of Songs that's different from every book in the Bible? You have any idea? Anybody want to take a guess? You can talk. I mean, God's never mentioned by name in those two books. Those are the only two books of all the 39, of all the 66 that we have that do not contain the Word of God. I knew Esther did, but I didn't know about the Song of Songs. So that's something unique about these two books. And interesting about Esther as we walk through this and try to find where is God in all of her life and what has taken place and all the things that are going on. Now, many of us have filled out a resume, and in these times I know it's getting harder and harder to find places to go, have the skills and qualifications that you need for some of the high-tech jobs that are moving into our area. And so they're paying good wages. But if I went with my resume, how many of them do you think would hire me for a high-tech job? Probably not one would even look at it if I sent it in. So when we send that resume in, we are trying to show that employer that we are qualified for that particular position that we are trying to see. So when we look at Esther's resume as a queen, she doesn't really qualify for a queen. Now, if she handed in her credentials and she placed that before the king, she would have anything that would be of much interest for that particular position. But what I want us to think about this morning is God's providence. And providence, we can look at it another way as that God sees. That God sees things before us. And so that's what we want to take a look at. John Piper, I think, wrote one of the greatest definitions of the providence of God that I've ever read. I'm sure there's others better, but this one is really an incredible definition. He wrote, "Life is not a straight line, leading from one blessing to the next and then finally to heaven." I think we'd all agree with that. Life is a winding and troubled road, switchback after switchback, he says. And the point of biblical stories like Joseph and Job and Esther and Ruth is to help us feel in our bones, not just know in our heads, that God is for us in all these strange turns. God is not just showing up after the trouble and cleaning it up. He is plotting the course and managing the troubles with far-reaching purposes for our good and for the glory of Jesus Christ. I think that's an incredible definition or defining what the providence of God is. When we're going through difficulties, when we're going through uncertainties, and then we see things work out in one way or the other. We have to remember behind all of that, before that result comes, is that God was already at work. We may not see him, just like in this book of Esther. We do not see his name, but we see his handprint and all over everything that takes place in her life. The first thing that I'd like for us to look at today is the providence of God through character and integrity. In chapter 2, verses 17 and 18, I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. It might be a little different from what you're used to each Sunday. But it says, "The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity." Now, when we had a new president to come in, that would be a wonderful thing. But I think we need to recommend that. We wouldn't have to pay taxes for a while, and he'd give us some gifts and all of these kind of things when we have a new change in the power structure. But I don't know about you, but that hadn't happened yet. I seem to always find, Uncle Sam finds a way to get a little bit more at the end of the year for some reason, or not. Now, what we have to remember is the setting behind all of this is Vashti's refusal to present herself before the king. Now, there have been many, we find that in chapter 1, verses 10 through 12, but there have been many explanations as to why she didn't want to do it. Some believe that she might have been with child, and then she does have a child later, or there is a child that comes along later. And others say that he was wanting her to come with nothing on at all, and she just was not going to do what he wanted her to do. And so I'm grateful that she made that stand. She took a stand for what she felt was right. Now, when you and I get to this section, or this part of Esther, there's been about 4 years that have passed since the king has banished Vashti. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie 100. It's a pretty incredible movie, and it's based on this part of these 4 years. When King Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, he goes by both names, and in the movie 100, he's got all of these big army and special forces that he has, and even a big naval operation as he is fighting the Greeks. The 100 Spartans defeated the massive army of King Xerxes. Now, he's just deposed his wife, the king, and he really didn't want to do it. He loved her. He didn't want to do that, but peer pressure got to the best of him, and he had a little bit too much to drink as well, so that played a part in it as well. But in the movie, there was a natural phenomenon, or we could say that God was working, and his providence was even working then, destroyed the entire fleet by a big storm that came up. So all of this is taking place, and I like to think that the Bible was not written in a vacuum. History is taking place. And this is what we're seeing here. Now, when he comes back, he suffered a great defeat. And he has and as he comes back, he really begins to miss Vashti. But it's too late. He can't turn the tables of time. And then we're introduced to Hadassah in verse 7 of chapter 2. Her name means myrtle, a tree. In Isaiah 55:13, she could have been named after this verse. It says, "Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle, and it shall make a name for the Lord, an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off." And myrtle branches today are still carried in processions at the Feast of Tabernacles, and they signify peace and thanksgiving. And so when her name was spoken, it would have reminded the Israelites that the name of the Lord would never be cut off, that it would remain forever. And Hadassah is an orphan. Her parents have died. And now it is her cousin that she is living with. He has probably adopted her. We don't really have a formal way in which they used adoption in those days, but most likely she was adopted by Mordecai, her cousin. And verse 15, I love this verse. It says, now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And it really says she carried kindness. Wherever she went, she carried kindness, or it could also be affection. She carried grace. She carried compassion wherever she went. And also the covenant love before his face. And so this is her character and her integrity. And God is going to use that to be appealing and to attract her, be more attractive to the king in the days to come. And basically, God wanted her in the palace. That was God's overarching plan. He wanted Hadassah to be in the palace. Now, I want to ask you a question. You just answered this within yourself. Do you believe in coincidences? I don't know if any of you watch NCIS, but you know Jethro doesn't believe. He has a rule for everything. I can't remember what that rule is. Sometimes it's Rule 41, but I can't remember. But he does not believe in coincidences. Things just don't happen just randomly. And so as we look at this book very closely and the life of Esther, we must remember that the things that happen, they're not coincidences. God is orchestrating. He is behind the scene, even though we don't see his name. It says that she was more attractive than all the other women. She stood out before the king. There was something about her that stood out. Was that coincidence or was that providence? I don't think it was a coincidence. I believe it was providence in which that made her attracted to her, to this king. Then the second thing that I would like for us to look at this morning is the providence of God by being in the right place at the right time. And this is verses 19 through 23 of chapter 2, and it reads, Now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the queen in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Now, Mordecai is in a place, God has placed him strategically in a place to know what is going on in the palace. He's been placed there. And so Mordecai informs Esther of this plot against the king's life. She gives the credit to Mordecai. But this event is recorded in the Chronicles of the king. But this is going to later, now God is orchestrating, putting things into place. This is later going to be used in God's timing. It's not yet useful for the timing that God has for this particular purpose. And Mordecai was in a position of authority and honor. And he used his position, not for his own benefit, but to help the king and his people, the Jews. Some have suggested that it was probably Esther who appointed Mordecai as the judge. And again, for his kindness to her. And as we see, another act of God's providence is that he placed him in this position for a very specific reason. Now we must remember that Mordecai and Esther were hidden in Persia, or modern day Iran, because God had a plan and purpose for them. And He's got us, but He may have you hidden here as well for a purpose and a plan that He wants to use you. Mordecai saved the life of the king by his information, but he was forgotten. Isn't that made that most difficult? When you do something great, or you do something at work, or whatever, and then it's soon forgotten. It happens many times. Example would be like a deserving person getting overlooked, and righteousness often going unrewarded. As there's a commercial on TV, I probably watch too much of both of that, commercials and TV. But there's a commercial on there, and there's this young lady, and it's a commercial for Indeed, I believe, one of these job search things. And she is next in line to receive a promotion, but instead she's overlooked for someone else. And then her phone goes off. And it says you have been, you have an interview for this same position at another company. She begins to hoop and holler, as we would say, and clap, and they can't believe it because they know she's been overlooked for this promotion. That happens to us sometimes, doesn't it? We might be next in line. We may be, we put our time in. We've done good work. We've done good things. We've tried to help this business or this company or whatever, and we're overlooked when it's time for promotion. Now I want to tell you this story about Elmer Bendener's account of them bombing, or a bombing run over the German city of Kassel. He says, our B-17 was barraged by a flak from Nazi anti-aircraft guns. That was not unusual, but on this particular occasion, our gas tanks were hit. Later, as I reflected on the miracle of a 20-millimeter shell piercing the fuel tank without touching off an explosion, our pilot, Bon Fawkes, told me it was not quite that simple. On the morning following the raid, Bon had gone down to ask our crew chief for that shell as a souvenir of unbelievable luck. The crew chief told Bon that not just one shell, but 11 had been been found in the gas tanks. 11 unexploded shells, where only one was sufficient to blast us out of the sky. It was as if the sea had been parted for us. Even after 35 years, so awesome an event leaves me shaken, especially after I heard the rest of the story from Bon. He was told that the shells had been sent to the armorers to be defused. The armorers told him that intelligence had picked them up. They could not say why at the time, but Bon eventually sought out the answer. Apparently, when the armorers opened up each of these shells, they found no explosive charges. They were clean as a whistle and just as harmless, empty. Not all of them. One contained a carefully rolled piece of paper. On it was written in Czech. The intelligence people searched our base for a man who could read Czech. Eventually, they found one to decipher the note, and it set us marveling. Translated, the note read, "This is all we can do for you now." So those shells had been captured somehow or the other, and the charges were taken out in order to save the lives of whoever and how many they could. And so they said, this is all we can do for you now. But boy, was it enough. It was enough. Timing is crucial in understanding God's plan. As it was with Esther, Mordecai being overlooked, for us, for things that happen, for situations and circumstances we go through. Timing is crucial. God does not work on our timetable. Now, I'm probably one of the most impatient individuals that walk the planet. You know, when I won't change, I want it like yesterday. I want something to change, but I want it to do it a little bit quicker than sometimes God wants it to take place. And I'm learning, but I'm I'm a blunt object. You really have to beat me with a ball peen hammer pretty hard most of the time to get things working. So Mordecai was in the right place at the right time. Those checks who somehow got those shells, they were at the right place at the right time. That was not coincidence. Neither one of those events. It was God's providence. And a third way we see God's providence is through our faithfulness. Our faithfulness. In chapter 3, verses 3 through 6, it reads, "Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, 'Why do you transgress the king's command?' And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But his disdain to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus." Now this is the event, as they would say, the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was when Mordecai would not bow. Some have suggested that it would have been idolatry for Mordecai to bow to this unbeliever. But most likely it goes a little deeper than even that. He did not want to show respect for this Amalekite, an enemy of the Jews. Haman served as an example of how deceitful and wicked the human heart can be. God spoke through Moses in Deuteronomy 25:19. "Therefore, when the Lord your God has given you rest from all your enemies around you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget." Well, there's an Amalekite still living. What happened? Somebody was disobedient, right? Somebody didn't do what God asked them to do, and that person was Saul, King Saul. He was told to destroy all the Amalekites. But along the way, some had to escape, because this one is still living. And so he did not do what God asked him to do. And at this point, Mordecai reveals who he is. He says, "I'm Jewish. I'm a Jew." Now, Haman had the authority to take Mordecai's life. He had the authority. He could have asked the king to execute Mordecai because of his not doing what the king has asked all the people to do. But he didn't want to stop there. He wanted all the Jews killed. In other words, he wanted another Holocaust to try and take care of all the Jews that were living. It was Christmas Eve, 1875. And Ira Sankey was traveling on a Delaware River steamboat when he was recognized by some of the passengers. His picture had been in the newspaper because he was a song leader for the famous evangelist D.L. Moody. They asked him to sing one of his own hymns, but Sankey demurred, saying that he preferred to sing William B. Bradbury's hymn, "Savior, like a shepherd, lead us." As he sang, one of the stanzas began, "We are thine, do thou befriend us, be the guardian of our way." When he finished, the man stepped from the shadows and asked, "Did you ever serve in the Union Army?" "Yes," Mr. Sankey answered, "in the spring of 1860. Can you remember if you were doing picket duty on a bright moonlit night in 1862? Yes, Mr. Sankey remembered, very much surprised. So did I, but I was serving in the Confederate Army. When I saw you standing at your post, I thought to myself, that fellow will never get away alive. I raised my musket and took aim. I was standing in the shadows, completely concealed while the full light of the moon was falling upon you. At that instant, just as a moment ago, you raised your eyes to heaven and began to sing. Let him sing his song to the end, I said to myself. I can shoot him afterwards. He's my victim at all events, and my bullet cannot miss him. But the song you sang then was the song you sang just now. I heard the words perfectly. We are thine. Do thou befriend us. Be the guardian of our way. Those words stirred up many memories. I began to think of my childhood and my God-fearing mother. She had many times sung that song to me. When you had finished your song, it was impossible for me to take aim again. I thought, Lord, who is able to save that man from certain death must surely be great and mighty. And my arm of its own accord dropped limp at my side. Haman could have taken Mordecai right then. He could have executed him right then. But again, that was not God's plan. Yesterday, I got a text that no grandfather or soon-to-be grandfather wants to get. My son wrote and said our daughter-in-law was having some problems and they were in the emergency room. And she was waiting to be checked out by the doctor because of some things that were going. Well, I was reading a book in a deer stand and I couldn't read anymore. I put the book down and I began to weep. Thinking, oh God, please don't let this happen. Don't let this child die. Please don't do that. Well, you see, just a few years ago, we were celebrating my daughter's engagement. And the night before the engagement party, my son's best friend was killed in a car accident. And he was so disfigured that they could not hardly identify his body. I remember being there. My son's a pretty strong young man. I saw him collapse on the floor. And all I could do was just stand behind him and put my arms around him. Nothing I could do. Nothing I could change. It was done. And yesterday it took all I could do. I thought I would have to call Greg. It was all I could do not to get my car and drive to Knoxville. And put my arms around my son again. But thanks be to God, that wasn't the answer. I wrote him, I said, Tim, have they heard a heartbeat? He said, they're about to do an ultrasound. And I guess, I don't know how many minutes passed. I was in a daze by then. But I was just trusting that God wasn't going to allow that to happen. I texted a friend right then. I said, please pray. He said, I'm praying now. I'm praying now. And a little while later, Tim wrote and said, they found a heartbeat, and man, boy, has he grown. What an answer to prayer. As Adas's name is, that God's name would not perish, would not ever be ended. And in God's providence, even though I couldn't see it, And that hour or so, 2 hours, whatever it was a long time. That's all I know. You know, God's timing was that He had it all under control, and it was going as He had planned. So, you know, God's providence is seen through our faithfulness to Him. But not only is God's providence seen in our faithfulness, but it is also seen in the exercise of our faith. Chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." And it says that Mordecai went away and did everything that she asked him to do. We must remember that a year has passed since the edict had been handed down, or it was determined that the Jews would be killed, and the anticipation of their total annihilation. A year has passed when we get to this part. You know, Esther's dilemma is a lot like our dilemma at times, isn't it? Her circumstances, or our circumstances, like hers did, hem us in and demand that we commit ourselves to act courageously and exercise faith. And Mordecai told her, "You're not exempt from this destruction. Even if the king refuses to accept her uninvited appearance or the extermination of her people." She was not going to be exempt from this atrocity that was about to happen. But we also have to remember that, you know, God's plan is not based solely, and it's not deterred by the failure of one individual. As Mordecai said, if you don't do it, God's got someone else who's going to do it. God will do it. His plan will succeed. And it may be that God has given you a plan and a purpose, and you're saying, I don't think I can do that. Well, you think about Esther. If you're uninvited, and if the king doesn't lay his scepter out for you to come, it's over. It's said and done. And she knew that. You know, Patrick Henry once stated, you all know this, "Give me liberty or give me death." Nathan Hale even remarked, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." They were willing to sacrifice it all. Esther had come to a point that she was willing to sacrifice it all. Mordecai's message to Esther is this: this is your hour. This is your time. Stand, speak, die if you have to. But this is your hour. But whatever you do, don't be silent. You know, folks, maybe that's why we're in such a mess in America. We've been too silent. We've been quiet as believers. I know I have. I haven't been as vocal as I should have been, and spoken out as I should have, I suppose, on occasions, just because I didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or whatever it is, just let it go. But he told her, he said, whatever you do, Esther, don't be silent. Don't be silent. Now, some of you want to remember this, and this is not aging anybody. It's just fact of life. Winston Churchill addressed the House of Commons in June 18, 1940. Some of you might remember this. If we can stand up to Hitler, he said, all Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad sunlight uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. So it is. That's what, in words, that is what Mordecai is saying to Esther. If you do this, this is going to be your finest hour to save your people, to have a part in that. You know, her royal position happened for this very reason. As we look back at verse 14, it says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And Esther's reply is her confession of faith. We don't hear her confessing faith in God, but as in her confession, she says, I will do what you say. But she's going to need some help. She needs some help. She is changed from fear to abandonment and faith, from hesitation to confidence and determination, from concern for her own safety, for concern for her own people's survival. She asked the Jews to join her in a fast. She knew she needed help. Yesterday, sitting in that tree stand, I knew I needed help. I knew I needed someone to be praying. I needed other believers to come alongside us, our family, pray. Folks, we need that. We need each other. We need that. We have to have that from one another. We need each other's support from time to time. And secondly, she through, though prayer is not mentioned, it was always an aspect of fasting in the Old Testament. We're not given all the details about what happens, but prayer was part of it as they were fasting day and night. Not just the 12 hours usual, but day and night. So she needed help. And her outlook, because of that spiritual help and guidance from her cousin, her adopted father, and her people that are gathered in the capital city of Susa, she has shifted from fear to faith, from reluctance to resolve, from personal safety to the concern for the safety of her people. She needed help. Even though God was orchestrating and working in the background, it was kind of like the little boy. The little girl said it was thundering and lightning and just booming and just making all kinds of noise. And she ran into her parents' bedroom and jumped in bed with her mom. And she said, I'm afraid. I'm scared. I want to stay in here with you. And the mom said, you know that Jesus is always with you. And she said, I know that, but I need someone with skin on right now. That's what we need from time to time, don't we? I needed that yesterday. I'm probably going to need it some tomorrow or next week or in the future. We need somebody with some skin on, don't we? We know Jesus has got it in control. But sometimes we need that support and that protection and that help from one another. As I conclude this time with you all today, we have this on our refrigerator. And I wanted to know a little more about the details where Amy gets this stuff that she pins and handwrites on the fridge. Well, these were spoken by Martin Luther King Jr. In a Washington, D.C. address in February of 1968. I just let you know I was 5 years old when it was spoken, so I don't remember. You tell how old I am. He said, "Finite disappointments do not remove our infinite hope." Our finite disappointments do not remove our infinite